There is a moment in Friends that I have watched probably a dozen times, and it still gets me every single time. It is not one of the famous ones, not a big dramatic scene with swelling music. It is small, easy to miss. Chandler is sitting with the group and someone says something that cuts a little close to home. Something about family or love or the future. And before anyone can see it land, before anyone can notice that it actually got to him, Chandler opens his mouth and makes a joke. Everyone laughs. The moment passes. Chandler leans back like nothing happened, and that is exactly the problem. Because nothing did happen, not on the surface. But underneath that joke, something real just got buried. Something that Chandler has been burying since he was 9 years old. Sitting at a Thanksgiving dinner table, watching his entire family collapse in real time. Most people simply remember Chandler Bing as the funny one, the sarcastic one. The one-liner machine who could diffuse any tension with a perfectly timed quip. And honestly, that reading of Chandler is not wrong. He really was the funniest person in that apartment, year after year. But I do not think that is the real story. I do not think it is even close to the real story.
Yes. Thank you. That was...
Because here is the thing about Chandler that I cannot stop thinking about. The humor was never really about being funny. It was never even really about making people laugh, not at its core. It was about survival. It was a wall built brick by brick, joke by joke, starting the moment his family fell apart in front of him. And once you understand that, almost everything Chandler ever did on that show starts to look completely different. I'm curious what you think before we go any further. Do you see Chandler as just the funny guy? Or have you always felt like something darker was running underneath all of those jokes? Let me know in the comments. I genuinely want to know. Let us start with the night his whole world changed. Thanksgiving. Chandler is 9 years old. His parents have gathered the family at the dinner table, and right there, over the turkey, his father announces he is leaving. Not just leaving his mother, leaving for the houseboy. The same houseboy who had just offered more turkey in a very feminine voice moments earlier. The one Chandler had probably seen around the house 100 times without ever quite understanding what he was looking at. In one single meal, everything Chandler thought he understood about love, about family, about what adults were supposed to be, fell apart completely, and he was 9 years old. He had no framework for that, no language for it, no one sitting across the table prepared to help him process what he had just witnessed. He just had the wreckage, sitting right there in front of him, smelling like turkey and gravy. And so he did the only thing a 9-year-old in that position could think to do. He made a joke, and the table, however awkwardly, however briefly, laughed. And for a few seconds, the unbearable thing in front of him became slightly more bearable.
Oh, come on, Monica. Reliving past pain and getting depressed is what Thanksgiving's all about.
That was the beginning, and he never really stopped. If you enjoy these kinds of deep character breakdowns, the things most fans completely miss, make sure you subscribe. There are many more of these coming, and I think you will like them. Now here is where I want to slow down, because most people, when they think about Chandler's humor, think of it as a quirk. A personality trait, something charming and a little neurotic that made him fun to watch. But there is a scene in season 1 that I think most viewers laugh through without realizing how much it actually reveals. Phoebe's boyfriend at the time, a psychologist named Roger, sits across from Chandler at a dinner and, almost casually, diagnoses him out loud. He says that Chandler's humor is a way of keeping people at a distance, that his fear of intimacy is, in his words, textbook, only child, parents divorced before puberty. He delivers it like he is reading from a clinical manual while eating a cookie. The whole table goes quiet for a second because he is right and Chandler knows he is right. And the only thing Chandler can actually do in that moment is get defensive and turn it into another joke.
We were away.
In a foreign, romantic country.
That scene is almost too honest for a sitcom to get away with. Because what Roger is really saying underneath the casual delivery is that Chandler built an entire personality around not being seen. The jokes were never a way of connecting with people. They were a way of redirecting people. Every single time something real got close to the surface, the humor kicked in like a circuit breaker tripping. A laugh went up, and the real moment disappeared behind it, like it had never happened at all. Think about how many times this exact pattern repeats across 10 seasons. Chandler gets emotional and deflects with a punchline. Someone asks him a sincere question and he answers with a joke instead. Someone gets close to something true about him. He wraps it in sarcasm so fast that the conversation simply moves on before anyone can pull the thread. He is hiding in plain sight. The loudest, funniest, most visible person in the entire room. And somehow still, nobody can actually find him. And before we get to where this hiding actually comes from, I want to sit with what it looks like up close, day to day. Because it is subtle, it is easy to miss if you are not watching closely. Watch what happens whenever someone asks Chandler a direct personal question. Not a surface question. A real one. About what he wants out of life. About how he is actually feeling. About whether he is okay. Watch how fast the deflection arrives. It is almost mechanical at this point. A setup, a punchline, a sideways glance. And then the conversation simply moves on, and the person who asked never gets an actual answer. Watch how he handles compliments. A sincere compliment from a friend, something real about him rather than a joke, makes him visibly uncomfortable almost every time. He does not know what to do with sincerity.
Hey everybody, say hi to Julie in New Mexico.
Hi, Julie.
Hi, Julie.
He deflects that too, usually with a joke about how uncomfortable the compliment made him. Watch how he talks about his own future, especially early on. When the topic of marriage comes up before Monica, Chandler treats the entire concept like a punchline. Not because he does not secretly want it, but because wanting something real and then not getting it is the most dangerous feeling he knows. If you never admit you want it, you cannot be devastated when it falls apart. That is not cynicism. That is armor, and it was built piece by piece across a childhood where the adults around him kept proving that love could simply stop one day. At a Thanksgiving table, without any warning at all. But that is not even the strangest part. The strangest part is where the hiding actually comes from. Because Chandler did not just grow up in a broken home. He grew up in a broken home with two parents who were each, in their own spectacular and exhausting way, completely consumed by themselves. His father became a Las Vegas drag performer. His mother became a best-selling erotic novelist. Both of them were publicly, extravagantly, theatrically themselves. And that left almost no room in the family story for a quiet kid trying to figure out where exactly he fit. Here is what is fascinating about Nora, his mother. She is the famous erotic novelist, and she is embarrassing to him constantly, publicly, extravagantly embarrassing. She talks about sex on national television without hesitation. She writes books with titles that make him want to disappear into the floor. At one point, she even kisses his best friend Ross after dinner, and Chandler handles all of it the exact same way he handles everything. He makes a joke. He performs his own discomfort as comedy. He turns his own humiliation into entertainment for everyone else in the room. But watch his face in those scenes, not the performance, the face underneath it. There is something in there that is not just embarrassment. It is the look of a person who has spent their entire life being the footnote to other people's stories. His mother is the headline. His father is the headline. And Chandler is the quiet kid standing just off screen. He is learning something specific there. When the people around you are too big and too loud to truly see you, you become entertaining enough that they at least notice you. And so he learned to perform, not in the flamboyant, attention-grabbing way his parents did, but in the quieter, more invisible way a child learns. The way you learn once you realize that being earnest and asking for love directly gets you nowhere. He built a version of himself that was funny enough to be liked and sarcastic enough to seem unbothered by anything, just detached enough that nobody could ever get close enough to hurt him. Now here is where I want to open something up, because the easy assumption is that Chandler's hiding was simply a failure, a dysfunction, something to be pitied. But that misses something important about how well it actually worked, at least on the surface. For a very long time, this strategy completely worked. Look at the way Chandler moves through the first few seasons of Friends. He is beloved by everyone in that apartment. He is the one everyone laughs with constantly. He is financially stable. He holds down a job he genuinely hates for years without complaining. Meanwhile, everyone around him chases dreams and falls apart in dramatic, visible ways. He is the reliable one, the consistent one, the one who always shows up, no matter what. And then there is the job itself. Statistical analysis and data reconfiguration, a title so deliberately obscure that even his closest friends cannot explain what he actually does for a living. For nearly a decade of screen time, and this becomes a running gag throughout the entire show, funny every single time it comes up. But think about it differently for a moment. Chandler is clearly intelligent. He is clearly capable, sharp, quick-witted in every interaction. He could have done almost anything with his life. And instead he chose, or perhaps fell into, a career so opaque that the people closest to him cannot even describe it. A job that visibly makes him miserable, but that he keeps anyway, year after year, because at least it is predictable. That is not a coincidence. That is the exact same pattern playing out in a different room. The same man who made himself socially invisible through humor made himself professionally invisible through sheer incomprehensibility. If nobody actually knows what you do all day, nobody can evaluate whether you are succeeding or failing at it. Nobody can really see you there, and if nobody can see you, nobody can be disappointed in you, and nobody can leave you because of who you turned out to be.
Oh my God.
What?
There's something new in the bowl.
The armor was never just personal. It was total. It extended into every single room he walked into. But try to think of a single moment, early in the show, where Chandler actually lets someone in completely. A real moment of vulnerability where the joke simply does not come. Where he just sits with something hard and lets another person see it, unfiltered. Those moments are almost impossible to find in the early seasons. Because the armor is never fully off. The deflection never really stops. Even his recurring relationships in those early years are the same defense mechanism, just playing out in slow motion instead of in a single sentence. Look at Janice, the relationship he breaks off by his own count, 3 separate times across the show, always with some elaborate comedic excuse. The voice, the laugh, something superficial enough that he never has to admit the real reason underneath it. He gets close enough to feel something real with her, and then the fear kicks in almost immediately. And suddenly there is a reason it cannot possibly work. Suddenly there is an exit, conveniently right there waiting for him. Because Chandler has never once seen commitment actually survive. He watched the most basic unit of his entire world, his own family, fail spectacularly and publicly. And somewhere in that 9-year-old sitting at that Thanksgiving table is the quiet, settled belief that love is simply something that ends. That adults leave eventually, no matter what they promise. That the safer move always is to be the one who disappears first. And then there is Kathy. This one is worth slowing down for because it shows the pattern from a completely different angle. Kathy is Joey's girlfriend when Chandler first meets her. Chandler falls for her almost instantly, against every rule the group has unofficially agreed to follow.
No, I am.
Chandler, sweetie, I know you can do this, okay? You have a
He spends an entire stretch of episodes trying to bury the feeling. Trying to joke his way past it. Trying to convince himself it is not real, and then they kiss anyway. What follows is some of the most exposed, least armored behavior we ever see from Chandler in the entire series. He is racked with guilt. He cannot make a joke big enough to cover how badly he feels about betraying Joey. He spends his actual savings buying new furniture for the apartment just to try to fix what he broke. It is, in its own strange way, the least funny and most honest thing he does for years. And when he and Kathy finally do get together, you can see him trying, genuinely trying, to be vulnerable with her. Insecure about comparisons. To Joey, asking Monica and Rachel for help, almost desperately, because he wants this one to actually work. And then it falls apart anyway. She cheats. He finds the evidence sitting right there in her apartment, and the wall goes right back up, thicker than before, because the data, as Chandler might have put it himself, only confirmed what he already believed. People leave, even when you let them in, especially when you let them in. And then I noticed something that nobody really talks about, the Mr. Heckles episode back in season 2. Their upstairs neighbor dies alone in his apartment, a bitter, isolated old man who spent his whole life chasing people away rather than letting them close. Monica and Rachel go through his belongings and find a photo album full of friends he used to have decades ago. And Chandler starts to quietly fall apart, in his own way. He looks at Heckles and sees a mirror staring back at him. He sees the exact stops on the line he is currently riding. Bittertown, Aloneville, Hermit Junction. He actually says that sentence out loud, half as a joke, the way he says everything. That episode is one of the most honest pieces of character writing in the entire show. And it tends to get remembered purely as a funny one. The snake speech, the crazy snake man bit, all of it gets quoted and laughed at constantly. But the comedy in that scene is doing exactly what Chandler's comedy always does. It is covering something real, right underneath the joke, where almost nobody bothers to look. That episode is genuinely devastating once you understand what is actually happening underneath it.
I don't know.
Because Chandler is not afraid of being alone in the ordinary way most people fear loneliness. He is afraid that he has already unconsciously set everything in motion to guarantee it. That the jokes, The deflections, the relationships ended too early are not symptoms of someone who simply has not found the right person yet. They are the behaviors of someone who has quietly decided that love is not something that gets to happen to him, without ever consciously choosing that belief. This is the wound underneath the wound, the divorce, the parents, that Thanksgiving table. Those things broke something open in him at 9 years old. But what the years afterward actually built was something more specific, more lasting, and far more dangerous. A quiet, settled belief that he was simply not the kind of person who gets to have a normal life. That something about him, his family, his strange, unspeakable job, his entire wiring made him fundamentally unfit. Unfit for the thing everybody else around him seemed to find so naturally, and so he hid. Behind the job, nobody understood. Behind the endless jokes. Behind Janice, who was safe specifically because she was so easy to leave. Behind the idea of himself as the funny, reliable, slightly sad background character, living quietly inside everyone else's love stories. And then there is the wedding itself, years later. I think it is the quiet emotional payoff to all of it, even though it barely gets discussed. Both of his parents are there. Charles and Nora, the two people whose spectacular self-absorption taught a 9-year-old that he was invisible, sitting in the same room for their son's wedding. For most of his life, Chandler avoided exactly this kind of moment. Family gatherings, forced closeness, the two of them occupying the same space. But he stands at the front of that room anyway. Visible, not performing, not deflecting toward a joke about how strange his family is.
Our little boy is getting married.
Oh, look at you.
Even though the material is sitting right there for the taking, he simply stands there and lets the day be about something real. That is not a small detail. For a man whose worst memory happened at a family gathering, choosing to build a new one is significant. On purpose. With the same two people in the room. That is its own quiet act of courage. And then Monica happened. Now I want to be careful here because the easiest version of this story is to simply say that Monica saved Chandler, that she was the cure, that love magically erased what his childhood had broken, and that version is comforting, sure, but I do not think it is actually correct. The thing about Monica and Chandler that most people genuinely underestimate is how slowly and carefully it was built, long before either of them admitted what it was becoming. They were not a couple who fell suddenly, the way Ross and Rachel did. They were two, people who had been quietly holding each other up for years without either one putting a name to it. Monica is the one who promises him, gently but firmly, that he will not die alone, right there in the Heckles episode. She sits with him in his fear instead of laughing it off the way everyone else does. She sees him, not the performance, not the constant jokes, him, specifically, underneath all of it. And Chandler, for what feels like the first time in his entire adult life, does not immediately run. But that does not mean the fear simply vanished overnight. Watch how he behaves in the earlier stages of their relationship together. He panics visibly when other people joke about the two of them getting married someday. He overcorrects so badly while planning his eventual proposal that Monica very nearly walks away from the relationship entirely. She becomes convinced he does not want any of it. He tells her to her face that the entire concept of marriage is ridiculous, mostly because admitting he actually wants it terrifies him more than losing her does. He lets her drive herself straight to Richard's apartment, her ex, before he finally stops performing long enough to tell her the truth. That scene with Richard is the emotional center of everything we have been building toward. Chandler walks into Richard's apartment, and Richard is, in almost every visible way,
Now can we go?
See, that's why we don't let her play.
everything Chandler has spent his entire life afraid of never becoming. Stable, successful, confident. The kind of man who clearly never had to hide behind anything in order to be loved. And Chandler stands there, in that apartment, and says quietly that he is going to ask Monica to marry him. No joke attached to it at all. No deflection, no punchline. Just the plain, undefended truth. For a man who had spent his entire life making absolutely certain that nobody could see what he actually felt. That moment is enormous. It is not simply a romantic gesture you might find in any other show. It is the first time, after 30 years of hiding, that Chandler Bing actually chose to be visible on purpose. And this is the part that I think genuinely changes how you see his entire arc across the show, once you notice it. Because the story of Chandler Bing is not really a love story, or at least not only that. It is the story of a person who spent decades building an airtight, soundproofed, perfectly invisible life. And then slowly, reluctantly, terrified the entire time, let one specific person see straight through it. Think about what it actually cost him to get there. 10 solid years of deflecting every sincere moment that came his way.
Jellyfish.
All right.
A childhood full of concrete evidence that the people who promise to stay always, eventually, leave. A job he hated that he kept anyway for nearly a decade because at least it was predictable and safe. A personality so thoroughly built around humor. He once admitted, out loud to Monica specifically, that the jokes simply came out before he could stop them, even when he genuinely wanted to. He told her that directly, that when things got too emotional, he just could not help it. The deflection happened automatically, almost against his own will, and she looked at him, heard all of it, and told him she already knew, and she stayed anyway. That is the exact thing that finally broke through after 30 years of armor. Because he believed that being seen meant being abandoned. Being seen and stayed with anyway was the one thing that could finally reach him. Monica did not fix Chandler, not in any clean or simple way. She did not cure him of anything, but she did something far more important than that. She made it safe for him to stop performing, even just a little, even just sometimes. She made the armor feel less absolutely necessary, one small moment at a time. And slowly, across the back half of that show, you can actually watch it happening in real time. The jokes start coming less often at exactly the wrong moments. The deflections get noticeably softer around the edges. There is a version of Chandler in the later seasons who can sit through a genuinely serious conversation without immediately escaping it. Who can say the words "I love you" without a punchline attached to them? Who can be afraid and still choose to move forward anyway? The proposal scene is the proof of all of it.
I never thought I would be so lucky.
Monica begins her own proposal to him and cannot finish it, completely overwhelmed, crying too hard to get the words out. And Chandler, the man, who had spent 30 years filling every silence with a joke to avoid being real, simply kneels down beside her. He finishes it for her, quietly, without the armor, without a single deflection. Think about what the show is actually saying with that single image, if you really sit with it. It is not saying that the right person magically heals you. It is not saying that love simply erases old wounds the way a sitcom plot resolves. It is saying something much harder and much more honest than that. It is saying that the bravest thing a person can possibly do is decide to be visible anyway. Even when every single piece of evidence in your own history insists that visibility is exactly where you get hurt the worst. Even when the 9-year-old still living somewhere inside you is sitting at that same Thanksgiving table, watching everything fall apart all over again. Chandler chose every single day of his relationship with Monica to keep showing up without the full armor on. Not because the fear ever fully went away, it did not, but because he decided deliberately that she was worth the risk of finally being seen. That is who Chandler Bing actually was, underneath every single layer of performance. Not the sarcastic one, not simply the commitment-phobic one, not just the guy with the unexplainable job and the parents who blew up his entire childhood over a Thanksgiving turkey. He was a person who learned, very young, far too young, that being invisible was always safer than being seen. And he built that invisibility so well. So funny, so charming, so consistently entertaining, that almost everyone who watched him forgot the whole performance was really just a frightened kid who needed somebody to finally stay in the room. Someone finally did. Think about the distance he actually traveled to get there, from a 9-year-old turning unbearable news into a punchline just to survive dinner, to a grown man kneeling beside his fiancée, finishing her sentence with no joke anywhere in sight. That distance is the entire story. It is the whole reason this character mattered to so many people watching at home, even if most of them could not quite explain why. And by the time it actually happened, Chandler had nearly convinced himself it never would. He had run the numbers in his own quiet way. He had done the statistical analysis.
Here we go. I think we proved our...
Maybe the one and only time in his life that strange, unexplainable job ever applied to something that actually mattered. And the data, as far as he could tell, said he was firmly on the Heckles track. Alone. Eventually. No exceptions. He was wrong. And that discovery turned out to be the single most important thing he ever found out about himself. That small, quiet correction to everything he had spent 30 years assuming was true. The dark truth behind Chandler's humor was never really that he was simply funny, or even that he was simply broken. It was that every joke he ever made was a tiny act of self-protection, repeated thousands of times across 10 years. Made by someone who genuinely believed the alternative to hiding was annihilation. And somehow, against every piece of evidence his own childhood had given him, he let someone find him anyway. That is not just a punchline. That might genuinely be the bravest single thing Chandler Bing ever did, across 10 full years of episodes. And almost nobody watching ever noticed it happening at all.